Hello everyone, and welcome to the Solo Gamers Club. I'm in the process of learning several new games that I'm preparing to bring to the channel, and at the same time, I'm also trying to learn a new gaming genre, which I'm completely unfamiliar with, solo role-playing. In this video, it's going to be more of like an informal diary, I guess, of my methods that I'm using to introduce myself into this new gaming arena. My background in role-playing ended with the close of the 1970s, so I'm going into this with no modern experience in the genre. I selected Forbidden Lands as my core set because there were many reviews that said that this system was ideal for conversion to solo play. Then, with the release of the Book of Beasts and its dedicated solo system, I felt comfortable enough to give it a try. So in this video, what I'm going to do is just kind of highlight some of the steps that I'm using to learn this new genre of solo role-playing. And I'm hoping that maybe this will serve as some benefit to interested viewers that are maybe considering this and are in the same situation as I am, which have very little background in role-playing in general. I began my process by reading, in this case, the player's handbook from cover to cover. And this is not a problem for me. I enjoy reading rule books, and especially if they're well written, in the case like this one is. And it's actually a pleasure to read through this. I find the information very interesting and the backstories that they have built. I wanted to do this to try to familiarize myself with the game's terminology and concepts. After I had my first read-through, then I did a second read-through where I took notes regarding the game's primary concepts, those in particular of skill checks, journeys, and combat, which appear to be the most frequently used portions of the rules. The basic system uses what's called a Year Zero engine, and this system is centered on the concept of successes, which are sixes, and banes, which are ones. The basic system focuses on the formation of a dice pool, and that's composed of three elements: a red skill die, a white attribute die, or base die, and black gear die. Now, I should point out that this game, they do offer customized dice for this. Now, I chose not to purchase those. They were actually a little pricey. They give you 10 dice, and I think the cost was $24 or $25 US. And, to be honest, you need almost two sets of dice to play this properly. So we're talking about, a $40 to $50 purchase. That was more than the base game. So I'm going to go with my regular standard dice, and these will work just perfectly for what we're doing. The advantage of getting the customized dice is they have symbols on there for the successes or banes. And that simplifies the game a little bit, but nothing that's going to prevent us from using standard dice, though. The system is very simple, as every action in the game is linked to a specific skill, and every skill focuses on one of the game's four base attributes, which are strength, agility, wits, and empathy. So we'll say, for an example, that our character wants to climb a rocky surface to get to a higher elevation where he can observe the surrounding countryside. This action would fall under the move skill. We would consult our skills chart, and we find out that the move action has an attribute of agility. It says used when you're jumping, climbing, moving fast, or performing any action requiring speed and motor control. So we already determined that this skill is going to be the move action. This is a sample character that I've created, and we'll use this as the example. So in this case, we're attempting to do a move action. So we'll check our skills area in move, and it says move, the base is agility, and we have no skill there. There's no level there. So what do we do now? Well, we always can use our base attributes. So in this case, we're attempting a move action. We would gain a certain number of red dice based on our level. Well, we don't have any, so we would get 0 red dice. But we do have the base ability, agility. And our agility right now is a 3. So that would give us a total of 3 dice, 3 white dice, to use for the test. So we would get out 3 white dice. And then next, we would find out, as an example, that a member of the party has some rope. And this offers us a gear bonus of 1 to the climbing attempt. So that would earn us a black gear die. And that would form our pool for this potential action that we're attempting to do, to climb this rock face and to get to a higher elevation and kind of survey the area. So this is our skill pool, or our dice pool, and we'll attempt to see if we can get a success with this. So what we'll do is we would roll this dice pool, and if we can get at least 1 6, we are successful in our ability to climb that rock face. All right, we have easily done it. We've got 3 successes. Now it's interesting, on our initial roll, 1s or banes have no effect on what we're doing. We're looking strictly at 6s. The banes will only come into play if we attempt to push this roll. And in this case, we've got 3 successes. So we easily climbed that rock face, and our character would be up on that higher elevation, and he might attempt another skill check of some kind. Maybe he wants to take a look at the surrounding countryside. Well, that might be a scouting roll, and we would make a scouting roll. Now that has a base using wits, and that's kind of how this system works, though, in a very basic sense. Now the push mechanism is very interesting in how this works. We'll just say for argument that this was the results that we ended up getting. We have no 6s. So at this point, our effort to climb that rock face was a failure. But we can push this, and how that happens is we would remove any 1s or 6s that we rolled from the dice, and we would re-roll the remaining dice in an attempt to try to get a 6. But the problem is these banes now become active, and that's going to cause damage to us. And if, say, there was a 1 on a gear die, that causes damage to that gear, and it loses part of its bonus ability that it can provide. So we'll just say, for the sake of argument, that we failed that roll, but we're going to push this. So we'll roll all the remaining dice, and we did not get any 6s. So we've still failed that attempt to climb the rock face, but we didn't get any extra banes either. So in this case, we would take 1 point of damage to the base skill that we were using, in this case, agility. So we would lower our agility from 3 down to 2. If we ever get down to 0, we're considered to be broken, and there's a procedure for that. We have a table that we would roll on, and that would be like a critical injury, so to speak, would occur. My next step was to dive into the solo rules that were featured in the Book of Beasts. This section walked me through the various procedures and tables that are required to play solo, and instructed me in the use of an oracle, which is going to act as the game master. The oracle allows us to pose questions, and by the use of a standard deck of cards, we can get responses to those questions, either affirming them or denying them in some level of capability, either a strong or a weak confirmation, or whatever, whatever the case would be. And that's going to form the basic elements that we're going to use during this solo role-playing, is that oracle. The last step of my preparation was to read through the Game Master's Guide, where I learned about the history of the Ravenlands, along with its various kin, gods, and religions. I made a point to not read the sections on artifacts, encounters, and adventure sites, as I want these elements to remain a surprise to me until they appear during the game. The creators of this game did a really wonderful job on the background and history that they provide for the player, particularly for the solo gamer. I know that wasn't their intention when they designed this. This game was not designed intentionally for the solo gamer, but the open-endedness that they've created with this system and the history and everything really lends itself well. It gives it that sandbox element that, at least what I'm looking for. This not hemmed in by anything, and I can pretty much go or travel or do whatever I choose to. And this system really makes that a very easy method to accomplish that. It's quite good. Now it was time to use what I had learned and create my first adventure. The solo rules suggested using the random creation process, which is outlined in the Legends and Adventures booklet. My first character is an Aesir orc sorcerer that I named Ergen Varfu. Since this character was a magic user, I reread the section on magic to make sure that I understood the basics. Now, this little booklet that they provide with the base game, the Legends and Adventures book, this is probably one of the most important elements that they could have provided for the solo gamer. And again, they didn't do this with the solo gamer in mind, but this translates extremely well for solo play. In this case, by following these 13 steps, you can randomly create not only a character, but their backstories. And that will become important a little bit later. But these backstories really facilitate getting started in this in a solo environment. You can use these backstories to answer a lot of questions that are actually quite difficult to answer. When you're first beginning, you don't know where to start and what to do. Well, these backstories really point you in a nice direction where to get started. And this was very, very valuable to me in getting this portion of the setup accomplished. So anyway, using the creation process, I created a backstory for my character that matched the results of these creation rolls. And this gave me two very important pieces with which to get started. One, a reason for my character to become an adventurer, and two, a starting location for the campaign. That was all part of just a little bit of thinking about some of the results from these, from the random creation process. Gave me a home region and a childhood background for the character, and then what they did in once they became an adult. We randomly selected their profession, and then that led to these formative events, and that from those formative events, the rest of the backstory flushed itself out. Now, with these preliminary elements completed, I started walking myself through the sequence of play and imagining myself, how am I going to start this solo role-playing? And it quickly became apparent to me that I would need some player aids to help me to remember some of the various in-game elements. Now, I realize that role-playing is a game of the mind, and you don't really need to have player aids and things to too much of a degree. But in my case, I'm more of a tactile person, and I felt more comfortable in having some type of these aids that would help me to kind of remember the in-game elements and to kind of learn the system. So this is definitely not a requirement. People don't have to do this, but this is what I chose to do for myself. It's just the way that I learn things. And I'll show you some of those player aids that I've created. The first thing I did was I started by downloading a few things from the Free League website and from solorpg.com. The elements on the Free League site were free, and the solorpg.com elements had a nominal fee involved with them. First thing I did was to download a black and white version of the map that is provided. I wanted the ability to be able to make notes on this, and I didn't want to do that obviously on the paper map that was provided. So I went with a black and white, and I could have printed this out on 11 by 17 or whatever I chose to, but I chose just with to get started, an 8.5 by 11 of the area that I'll be starting the campaign in. Ends up, when you look at the campaign map, we find out that this is the arena forest, and that's where we're going to be starting our campaign. So what I did is I just took some colored pencils and colored in the forest green, and the mountaintops are brown, and I did a border around it, and this would be the area that our character, Ergen Varfu, would have been from, and he would be familiar with these lands. So anything inside this orange land or line is in Aesir orc lands, which he would be familiar with, and he would kind of know of those things. Anything outside of that, he doesn't know that from Adam. Next thing I did was to get a 3-ring binder, and I would use this to place any of those elements that I purchased online or downloaded online into one convenient location. So I decided to put it into this 3-ring binder. And some of the elements that I purchased online included a solo expansion, which was completed by the original designer of the solo rules for the Book of Beasts. And let me turn to that area. And this is the solo expansion I purchased. I think it was $3.99 on that solo RPG site. And it was written by Matt Kay, and he's the designer of the solo rules in the Book of Beasts. So this is kind of like, from what I understand, a kind of director's cut that he produced. He couldn't fit all of this stuff in with the allotted space that he had in the book, so he's offering this as a supplement to that. And what he does here is he goes into a little bit more detail in some of the areas. He gives us 2 other professions that we can be, an explorer and a scout. And then he gets into some animal companions, which are a part of the original rules, but he flushes this out a little bit more. And a lot of people like to play with a companion, a wolf or a cat or whatever you'd want. And he's got rules in here that will allow those companions to help you in your adventuring. But one of the biggest things is this expanded journeying. And what he's done is he's kind of customized these more for to give them a little bit more depth in giving you prompts as to helping the solo player imagine the terrain and different incidents that will happen as you're traveling across the Ravenlands. Now, he's using a card system. It's a standard deck of cards without jokers, 2 through an ace. And it works pretty well. We've got these different mishaps that he's expanded on: foraging, hunting, and fishing mishaps. He gives you a definitions area to let you know what's happening with those. And he's kind of just expanded the original solo rules that he's included: hunting and such things. Expanded encounters. This is really handy because what he does now is he's combining the random encounters from the original Game Master's Guide and the new random encounters from the Book of Beasts. So this gives us the ability to be able to access both of those while we're playing, and this will tell us precisely which out of which book that random encounter is going to come from. He's also included a no encounter mood oracle, and what this happens is we can use this if there ends up to be no encounter. We can draw a card and find out like what's happening in that area. There might be no encounter, but there might be some story background that we can generate from this. So anyway, he's done quite a bit of work with this to aid the solo player, and I think this is a definite benefit, and I would recommend that if you're going to play Forbidden Lands solo, that you would get a copy of his expanded solo rules. Then I went about creating some aids that would help me to graphically display things like action assignments, weather conditions, character status, etc. For this task, I went to my old friend Microsoft PowerPoint, where I designed the items that I needed. Now, once again, these are definitely not necessary to play the game solo. This is something of my own kind of creation, form of the way that I play games. And like I said, for me, it's more of a tactile thing, and I like handling things while I'm playing. So what I ended up doing was I kind of examined the rule book and looked through the primary elements of the game that I would need the most help with in remembering some of the concepts. So what I did is I created a set of weather counters. And I've got some counters here for the temperature, some for rain, and others for whether there was mild conditions, light breeze, or etc. And so that's what I've done with those. I've also got some condition counters to help me remember some of the conditions that the characters might have undertaken. As an example, they're thirsty, and I've also put the rules on these to let me know what the effects of this are. Like, say, as an example, if I'm hungry, I cannot recover strength, and I suffer 1 damage to strength each week until that's rectified. And we've got some other ones that are kind of rare, but if a character becomes diseased or poisoned, or if he's in a hidden location, I can use these to mark those things and acts as a little bit of a kind of a reminder of myself, and gives me some of the rules already right on the counter, so I don't have to look them up in the book. So I thought that this was, for me anyway, this was a would be a benefit. Now I also created some tokens to help remember whether the characters have eaten or not eaten, or drank water or had not drank water. And these, I made these double-sided, and those will be used pretty much every day during the journeying process. So I've created a set of those that I can use for my characters, and these are just, like I said, things that will help me to facilitate learning this new system. I've also created some character tokens, and in this case these are the two characters that I'm going to be using in my test playthrough. I've got Ergen Varfu, the Orc Sorcerer, and I've got a Dwarf, and we'll see a little bit later how that Dwarf worked into the storyline. In addition, I chose to use circles rather than squares for enemy tokens, and these are just standard tokens that I can use to display the location and what type of creature is opposing us. So I've got, like, Roka orcs, crocodile, a bear, and a villager, and a rust brother, and I made just a selection of those that I can use and use those to help me resolve combats or situational conditions that will happen while I'm playing. Now these are a couple other displays that I've created, and these are going to be used pretty much every turn of the game. First one is a table that I can use in connection with my character counters that I created to decide on and log what actions they're going to be taking during the turn. So as an example, we've got our two characters in the party, and we'll say that we're going to end up hiking. Okay, so we would place our characters in the hiking box, and then it gives us a little bit of information as to what that action entails. And we'll say that as they're hiking, we're going to have Ergen lead the way, and we'll have the dwarf keep watch, and that tells us that it's going to be a scouting role and a survival role, and we get a little bit of information as reminders as to what that procedure entails. We'll say that in a future turn, one person might make camp and the other guy is going to go fishing, and then this automatically gives us a heads up as to what we need to do to be able to perform that action. Now the basic elements of this game are broken into what they call quarters of days. So I've created a little display here. I chose to go with a circle similar to like a clock or the sun rising and falling. And what we're going to use this for is several things. As an example, we'll say that the campaign is going to start in fall rise, which is what I'm going to end up doing. That's a portion of the calendar, and we'll say that fall rise, and we know that that is going to be an autumn turn. So I've got a token there to let me know that this is autumn that has certain effects, in-game effects on hunting and fishing and things like that. We also know that we're going to be beginning in the morning. So in the morning, as long as it's not a winter turn, we'll have light in the morning. So we'll put a light marker there, and that affects our ability to travel on the map. If it's light, we have no ill effects. But if there's darkness, that has modifiers to our lead the way roll. I've also created, like I had showed you, some weather effects counters, and we'll just say for the sake of argument that we determine that the temperature is mild, there's a light breeze, and light rain has started. So we'll put those tokens out on the day track, and this will tell us there's no effects from mild temperature, no effects from a light breeze, but there is -1 to the lead the way roll for light rain. So this is just a way to help me in remembering those steps. And in addition, we can use our food and water counters. We would place those on the morning area, and this tells us that we haven't eaten or drank yet. And then once the party ends up doing that, we can flip these over, and that would let us know that we've accomplished those important tasks. Another thing I downloaded from the Solo RPG site for a very nominal fee was a Ravenlands calendar, and this is quite helpful in that it automatically will tell us, based upon that season, which parts of the day are daylight and which are darkness. It also gives us, the moon sequences, a new moon or full moon, and it tells us that what holiday it would be in that season, and whether there's a foraging modifier for that season, which is quite good. And this is a nice way to keep track of our timing, and we can cross these off, and they recommend that you tick off each box as you go through the day, morning, day, evening, and night. So up to this point, everything had gone well, and I felt I was ready to get my adventure going. In the meantime, I had created a random companion for my character named Calic Redrog. And in the backstory, Urgen rescued Calic from a group of enemy Roka orcs, and now Calic has agreed to aid Urgen in his adventures, and maybe find his homeland along the way. And that was the backstory that all came from that backstory that I created with the Legends and Adventurers book. And I determined from that backstory that I'm going to start my adventure in this space here in the Arena Woods. What had happened was Urgen was an orc sorcerer. Well, there was a mishap, and that mishap in his magical experiment ended up killing the nephew of Eldag the Ravager, which was the king of the orc tribe that Urgen belonged to, and he was banished. And in orc lore, to be banished from the tribe is almost equal to cowardice in battle. So he was very dejected, and he went out into the woods and likely had some ideas that he might not want to exist anymore. Well, lo and behold, he finds a group of enemy Roka orcs leading 4 or 5 or 6 short men with beards down a path. And that's when Urgen sprung into action. There was some confusion that happened. Some orcs got into a fight, and in that time, the dwarf, Calic, was able to escape his shackles, and he ran into the woods. And lo and behold, he was, as you can imagine, quite shocked to see another orc lurking in the bushes. So Urgen motioned to him that to remain quiet and to stay still, and eventually they escaped into the trees, and they gave the enemy orcs a slip. And that is how Urgen became friends with this dwarf prisoner. So I ended up laying out my materials, and I sat down and I said to myself, okay, what do I do now? And the dreaded deer in the headlights syndrome had hit me. I had read the rules and understood them, along with the getting started section, but I was still drawing a blank as to what to do next. I must have sat at the table for 10 or 15 minutes staring into the abyss, and finally I said to myself, what would you do if you were Urgen? And then it became a bit clearer. I would want to get as far away from the orcs of the opposing tribe as possible. So how would I do this in game terms? I would need to travel. So I got out my travel sequence and I began to go through it line by line. As a part of my preparation, I created a few charts that were the most commonly used tables that I would need, and I wouldn't have to would minimize how much I'd need to go in and reference the charts in the books. So I ended up creating a sequence of play for myself that matched up with the rules, and then I just started with step 1, morning, 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. I noted the current season and date on the calendar, and I shuffled my deck of cards, and I made the draws from the cards to determine the weather conditions. And then I determined my activities for those morning hours, and I just kind of went from there, and that really helped me in kind of breaking out of that deer in the headlights syndrome that I had. I had no idea what to do, but I just placed myself in that character's shoes as to what they would want to do, and then I kind of discovered what I need to do in game terms to accomplish that, and that seemed to really help me. So I ended up getting out my travel sequence, and I began to go through it line by line. And I'll have to admit I struggled with it at first, as I was unsure if I was doing everything right. But in the end it worked out, and I made the required skill checks, adding in modifiers from weather effects and terrain, and it worked. The characters arrived in a new hex, and I'd completed my first exploration of a new hex. And the first turn was, the first few turns were a little difficult, and it took a little getting used to it, at least for me. But I found out that the more I played, the easier it got. And I found it important to, like I said, put myself in that character's position and ask questions and take actions that I would have done for myself, given the current realities within the game. And first few turns were a little difficult, and it took me a little bit to get comfortable with this new system. It did help me to verbalize my actions as I made skill checks. This kind of placed an image of the action in my mind, and that helped in remembering the in-game steps, believe it or not. I also kept a journal of sorts, and this not only recorded my actions, but it made, if I had any errors, it made it much easier to go back and correct. So the journaling was important for me, and that helped quite a bit. Now, the method that I've chosen and outlined to you is likely not the best method, but I thought I would like to share these experiences with the viewers in case some of you, you might be interested in starting this and you just needed a little help or encouragement as I did. Now, one thing I should point out is I purposefully did not watch any videos on solo role-playing. I had seen some in the past. There was one video series that I watched, and that individual was playing Call of Cthulhu using a virtual tabletop, and that's what actually really kind of drew me into this. I didn't even know that this truly existed, to be honest, that solo role-playing was a possibility. And he kind of, in his videos, he kind of walked through how he accomplishes this using a virtual tabletop. And that was quite some years ago, but that was really my only experience with watching anyone with a solo role-playing video. And so I chose to purposely avoid that. I'm going to watch those in the future, but I wanted to come at this from a completely fresh approach with just my own knowledge in this stuff, and to see if this is something that would interest me. And I do find this quite interesting. Whether I'm going to be able to bring this to the channel or not, I'm still not sure of yet. But I can say this, the more I play this, the more comfortable I'm getting with it. One thing I did discover almost immediately is playing alone as opposed to filming a playthrough for others to watch are two very different things, the latter being much more difficult. So in a future video, I'm going to walk you through the opening stages of my test playthrough, and I'll try my best at providing examples of how the game might be played. Once again, a disclaimer up front, I've never done this before, and it's a little outside my comfort zone, to be quite honest. And I don't know altogether exactly what I'm doing yet, but I can tell you this, that it does become easier the more you play. And I'm going to probably do one more video on this, and then we're going to switch into some of the games that I'm studying right now that I want to bring to the channel in the near future. And until I can get those games under my belt, I'll probably return to a couple familiar titles for myself, and those will be the next videos coming up in the queue. But this is definitely something that might appear in the future on the channel. I find this quite interesting and very rewarding, really. The depth that you can get into with the narrative that this solo role-playing system can provide, and I really like it. So until next time, thanks for joining me at the Solo Gamers Club, and I hope that this short video diary was useful to you, or at least interesting. So in the meantime, everyone, thanks for watching, and have a good evening. Good night.